I just watched something that made me sick to my stomach. It was a documentary about Carl Lentz. Carl Lentz was the pastor of Hillsong Church in New York City, a big mega church. It's the church that Justin Bieber went to. In fact, you may not know who Carl Lentz is when you hear that name, but you probably know him as Justin Bieber's pastor. The reason that documentary made me sick to my stomach is because about 2 years ago, Carl Lentz had to be removed from Hillsong Church as its pastor because of a scandal that he was involved in, an extramarital affair that apparently had been going on for some time. And in the documentary, they show some video of him making, I guess they're video phone messages that he would send to this woman that he was having an affair with. And clearly this was not like a one-night stand or something that happened, a quote-unquote mistake. It's never really a mistake, but if it was just he slipped and fell once, it would be different. This was something that he was consciously, intentionally engaging in. He would express to her his love, his commitment to her, even though he was married and had children. So it was disgusting on that level. But that wasn't the thing that made me sick to my stomach, that infuriated me most. What infuriated me most, and the documentary, which was done by some kind of secular news outlet, so it wasn't a religious documentary, it had no sympathy for him, but I found it to be incredibly balanced, even though it wasn't done by some kind of like Christian outlet that was trying to put Christianity in a good light, despite what Carl Lentz did. The documentary was incredibly balanced. They interviewed all kinds of people who were favorable to him and people who weren't. But what was apparent in that video was that Carl Lentz had always wanted the spotlight, that he wanted to be what people have termed now a celebrity pastor, that he sought out people like Justin Bieber to associate with them because he believed that would bring the spotlight to him. Now, to give him the benefit of the doubt, they didn't talk about this in the video, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that when he started out, he aspired to be a celebrity pastor because he had what I'll call a holy ambition, that his ambition was to impact the world for Christ, that he thought that by associating with famous people, he could have more of an impact and it would lead more people to Jesus. So I'll give him that benefit of the doubt. But what was clear in this documentary is that by the end of his ministry, when the scandal happens, he had become consumed with the spotlight for himself. He really wasn't doing it for any kind of holy ambition, but much more so for a personal ambition. And what infuriates me most about that is that he was getting in the way of people's relationship with Christ. I was speaking with a woman a number of years ago whose husband was a good friend of mine, and when he got sick with cancer, he asked if I would do his service, his memorial service. So I kind of walked with him through a hospice process, provided kind of like pastoral spiritual support through his hospice process, and then I planned the service when he eventually passed away. We put the service together with his wife. I didn't know his wife that well until that point, until the very last few weeks and days of his life through hospice. And I watched her take care of him in remarkable ways, and then got to know her as we kind of put the service together to kind of fulfill his wishes for the service. It was through the fire department, so there's a lot of like moving pieces because there's a fire department funeral, a lot of things happening, honors and stuff like that. So it was a kind of a complicated process. So we had to work together closely. And in getting to know her, I found out a little bit of her story. After his death, I followed up with her as I normally do with people, and did a couple pastoral visits just to see how she was doing at different stages of the grieving process. And as I did that during those pastoral visits, I got to know a whole lot more about her story. I had learned through the planning of the service that she was no longer a churchgoer, that she really didn't have much of any kind of faith, at least not a traditional kind of faith. But when I spoke to her after his death and got to hear some of that story, some of the background, I found out why. When she was a little kid, she grew up Catholic, there was a priest who did some terrible things, did some vicious things, did some horrendous things that basically scandalized her, that scarred her for life, that turned her away from the church and from God and from Christ for good. And so when we talked, I started to explain to her why I am drawn to Christ. I obviously explain, as I have many times on this website, that it all came through this kind of intellectual quest, that it was the reason and evidence that led me to trust it's true. But the thing that, once I trusted it was true, that really drew me to it, that made me want it, that made me realize that this is the best thing ever, was, as I shared with her, what I discovered in the parable of the prodigal son. That was instrumental for me, because in that parable, what Jesus is saying about God, about the Trinity, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, what he's saying about himself, is that the essence of Christian faith is a God who loves us unconditionally, like this prodigally loving Father. That's the transcendent nature of our God, and that's what a relationship with him promises, that kind of perfectly unconditional love. And as I told her, shared with her, that that's been my experience of what Christianity is about, a relationship with Christ is about, she started to kind of light up, and she said, I like that. Then I went on to explain, because of the connection with the fire service, that another thing that made a huge impact on me was that God had proven his love by coming and dying on a cross. He had shown us no greater love, a perfect love. That God, by becoming human and dying on the cross, had shown us how real his love for us is, shown us in the most powerful, profound, and perfect way possible. And as I shared that also with her, she even lit up even more and said, I really like what you're saying. But as we talked, it was clear that she was kind of vacillating back and forth, going from what she was hearing and being kind of drawn to it, but also that what had scarred her in the past was viscerally just blocking her, keeping her from saying yes to it, from saying, yeah, I really like that. I'd want a God like that, but I just can't trust myself to that. And I was getting kind of frustrated. Unfortunately, I wasn't really frustrated at her. I was more frustrated at what the priest had done to her. So I blurted out something. I didn't mean to yell at her. I didn't mean to kind of shout it out at her, because it really wasn't to her. It was more to the priest, what he had done to her. I said, don't let anyone stand in the way of your relationship with God. Don't let anyone get in the way of your relationship with Christ. And when she heard that, even though I kind of yelled it at her, I didn't mean to blurt it out that way. When she heard that, she kind of like looked like, in a very like absolutely genuine way, she kind of like looked up and said, you know what? I need to think about that. Like that makes perfect sense to me. Like it kind of clicked at that moment. And she was open to receiving the idea that God could love her this unconditionally, to overcome what that priest had done in getting in the way of her relationship with Christ. That's why what Carl Lentz, about to say Justin Bieber's pastor, Carl Lentz, that's why what Carl Lentz did is so disgusting to me, so infuriating. Him seeking this celebrity pastor status, him seeking the spotlight, it's not just that he's created a scandal, it's that he has gotten in the way of people's relationship with Christ. Now, I'm not judging him, only God can judge him. But Jesus chose his harshest words for those who created that kind of scandal. Jesus says in very vivid terms, he says, it would be better for somebody to have a millstone tied around their neck and thrown into a lake than to create this kind of scandal. Jesus was infuriated at this kind of scandal because he knew it would get in the way of people's relationship with him. And the whole idea of being a celebrity pastor, what Carl Lentz was seeking to be, the status he had attained and what he was continuing to cultivate in himself, is a complete oxymoron. There's no such thing as a celebrity pastor. Look at Jesus. What does Jesus say? The Son of God himself, God incarnate in human form. He says, I came not to be served, but to serve, to give my life as a ransom for the many. If the Son of God himself came to serve, then who are we to seek the spotlight, to have people give us accolades and fame and fawn over us? Who are we to seek that spotlight, which eventually will lead to a fall, like happened with Carl Lentz, to some kind of scandal? It's inevitable with all the celebrity pastors, the big TV evangelists who've fallen. When they seek that spotlight, the arrogance in that ultimately leads them to create some kind of scandal. Being a celebrity pastor is possible by Jesus' standards, by his teaching, because he said the people he calls to be leaders in the church, and not just leaders in the church, not just pastors, but everybody, anybody who wants to follow him, has to be like him. It has to be somebody who is willing to lay down their life for others, who is willing to serve, not to be served. That's what true Christianity is about. But the disgusting thing about what Carl Lentz and other people who create scandal do is that they keep people from ever seeing that. Most people I speak with who've rejected Christianity, who don't believe in Jesus, who think the whole thing is ridiculous or stupid or irrational, they haven't actually looked at the evidence. As I talk more with them, I find out that they really haven't considered the evidence for Christianity. They haven't contemplated how compelling of a worldview it could be. They haven't seen the beauty of it, the beauty of who Jesus is, because like the woman I was talking to, my friend's wife after his death, like her, they all have a story where some Christian, whether it was a leader, whether it was somebody in the public eye like Carl Lentz, or just somebody that they ran into, where some Christian got in the way of the relationship with Christ. Some Christian was not acting Christ-like at all. And I would submit to you that Carl Lentz, the reason he could seek the spotlight for himself, whatever his motives were early on, whether he had kind of this holy ambition to impact the world by becoming a celebrity pastor or not, whatever his motivations were early on, that when somebody like that becomes consumed with themselves, they really don't know Jesus. They can't know him, because anybody who knows him, who knows what he's all about, this prodigally loving God, this God who loved us so much that he would give his life for us, anybody who's captivated by that love will try to love other people in the same way. Not perfectly. Us Christians are a mess, and it's not about our performance. But when you know that this is who your master is, this is who the lover of your soul is, you can't help but want to love this way too. And it has to start to seep through. It has to start to bear fruit. Otherwise, you probably don't really know him. And for all of us, every single human being, the infinite, perfect love that our hearts long for, that they were made for, can only be satisfied in a relationship with him. That transcendent love that is the source of the infinite love, the perfect love, the perfectly unconditional love that our hearts were made for, and the infinite joy, the infinite bliss that comes with us, that hearts yearn for. That's why we're not satisfied in anything else. Even the best of human loves can't fully satisfy us. That can only be found in him. So if you're one of those people who have encountered Christians who have somehow driven you away from him, who have hurt you, who have not been Christ-like at all, if you're one of those people who has watched the story of Carl Lentz or some other famous celebrity pastor, their fall from grace, and has rejected the whole thing because of that, I plead with you to take another look, to give Jesus another chance. Because not only is it all true, like if you look at the evidence, you'll find that it's all true. It's the most compelling worldview logically, rationally, and it has the most evidence, historical, metaphysical, philosophical. But you also find out that it is the best thing ever, that Jesus is the most beautiful thing in the universe. A relationship with him is the most beautiful thing in the universe. It will give you what your heart longs for most. So what do you think of Carl Lentz? Had you heard about his story, his fall from grace? Did you know anything about him? What do you think of the idea of a celebrity pastor? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that. You can go to the Contact EJ page of the Raising Jesus website and leave them there. I look forward to hearing from you.